Paramedics Mind presents Spooktober.
Every town has one. A twisted tale of unnerving contorts, shared among the people. Falkland Hills was no different. At the end of the block, just beyond Maple Street, lay a dilapidated and decaying home. A home uninhabited for years. Well, uninhabited by your traditional dweller, anyway. Among the town's youth, stories of haunt and lore filled the darkened spaces of that lifeless place. Teenagers of the more adventurous variety would often dare those among their personal rabble to enter the fabled structure and snoop around. Typically, this went without incident. But sometimes, on some nights, those lucky enough to get out would report ghastly happenings of the supernatural. From floating objects to floorboards moving. The stories of this place were endless, though never substantiated. Authorities chalked it up to overactive imagination, or overindulgence of alcohol or marijuana. Things were never really investigated. No one really knew why the place was left standing. Some assumed it was a historic landmark, though there were no records to indicate as such. Others presumed that it was a home owned by an apathetic investor that just hadn't gotten around to flipping the place. Whatever the case, there it stood, in all its aging glory, beckoning the curious wanderer. There was one night a year when this storied structure garnered more attention than on others. Halloween. Every year without fail, pumpkins and other spooktacular adornments were left littering the arthritic steps leading to the prodigious door. And every year at least one of the town's rambunctious youths would dare to enter. Again, typically without incident. But on a chilled Halloween night some years ago, 3 friends would enter and never be seen again. Drew, Matthew, and Stephen, all 12 years old respectively, would venture from their trick-or-treating round and transplant themselves to the bottom of 5 rickety steps leading to the entryway of that spooky old house. "I dare ya!" Drew nudged Matthew. Unease permeated the group, but forced smiles hid their trepidation. "I'll go," Stephen remarked. Dressed as a skeleton, he made his way up toward the ominous door. Boards hung transverse as cautionary dissuasion to those looking to enter. But on that cold Halloween night, Matthew, Stephen, and Drew were steadfast in their mischievous mindset, and nothing was going to deter them. All having grown up in Falkland Hills, this derelict abode had acted as a beacon of intrigue for the boys. And now that they were 12 and feeling invincible in the others' company, that night was the night. Stephen stood mere inches from the boarded doorway now and peered back down the steps at his gawking friends. "See, it's not so bad, it's just an old house. Get up here." Both Drew and Matthew acquiesced. Drew, donned in his vampire best, and Matthew, a hideous zombie, now stood with their skeleton compatriot. The 3 zealous ghouls reunited at the top step of that blackened house at the end of the block, just beyond Maple Street. The 3 lads traiped cautious steps along the wraparound porch in search of a way in. The wood beneath their feet bemoaned wooden cries of anguish and lament as they moved from plank to plank. "Over here!" Drew called out while waving his hand. He had found a window with space just big enough to fit the frames of 3 separate 12-year-olds. How fortuitous. One by one, they made entry into the foreboding structure. Once inside, they stood near to each other and motionless as they allowed their eyes to grow accustomed to the darkened interior. Generations of dust, dirt, and cobweb decorated the home in a delicious tapestry of macabre. Stephen withdrew the flashlight that he had stowed away in his treats bag and turned it on. The illuminated beam brought the dreary interior to view. It just so happened that the beam of light did little to comfort the boys. The inside of that old house was frightfully peculiar to observe. Aged photos of times long since come and gone rested in decaying frames beneath thick layers of overlapping web and dust. It took the boys a few minutes to find their legs before moving away from the window. They began to walk slowly throughout the gothic dark, each boy remarking on something of note to the other.
Whoa, look over there, that old fireplace. Are those bones?
Matthew queried.
No, you idiot. They're just old logs. Don't be dumb.
Drew responded. The irony is in fact that Drew also suspected that bones lay where logs and ash should be, but he neither wanted to voice it nor believe it. So he instead dismissed it as lunacy, and the three continued their inquisitive voyage throughout the home. They stayed to the main level for a while, picking up odds and ends before placing them back down. And just as a sense of calm and ease befell the boys, Stephen's voice bellowed out.
Holy cow!
The spines of Matthew and Drew reverberated as if to be guitar strings recently plucked.
What? What is it?
Matthew asked to Stephen. Stephen stood from where he had been kneeling and was holding something in his right hand. It was a piece of clothing, but it didn't match the decor of the house. It was newer.
Isn't this Mary's sweater?
The reason this query was so jarring was because Mary had been a girl in their class. She had gone missing 2 Halloweens before. The rumor was that she had gone into the old house where the boys now were. Only when she went in, she never came out. An extensive search of the town and the house yielded no hopefuls, and Mary was presumed dead. There had been a funeral and everything.
No, there's no way. The cops would have found it if it was hers.
Drew denied. But it was hers. Her name was stitched to the label. Mary Hollister. The boys read the name and became respectively ill in the stomach. Without saying a word to one another, they all agreed it was time to leave. So they dropped the sweater and turned to flee toward the open window from whence they came. But before any of the three could move, they were halted in place by another ghastly discovery. Mary. Standing before the three boys was a specter of Mary's spitting image. She had not aged. She was still dressed as Little Red Riding Hood, the costume she had been wearing at the time of her disappearance. Her eyes were black and without life, her skin pale and translucent.
Mary?
Matthew's voice quivered. The specter did not voice a reply. Instead, it simply pointed to a shelf above the fireplace. Stephen used his flashlight to highlight the area. On the shelf sat a plaque. The three boys moved over to the shelf as Mary continued to point. Horrid incredulity saturated the boys as they moved. Once close enough to observe the plaque, a frightful whisper fell loose from Mary's glowing figure.
Read the sign,
the voice commanded. So they did. Using his sleeve, Matthew removed a resting layer of dirt from the plaque, and the three read in unison.
The house is hungry.
It read. A moment of fight, flight, or fright encapsulated the boys. Once again, without spoken word, they agreed. Flight. The three boys turned to run for the window, but when they turned around, Mary was no longer alone. An army of pale figures stood like a haunting sea between the boys and the open window. Every soul that had ever been lost to the house now served in perpetuity for the will of that place. And that place, that house, was hungry. Hungry for more lost souls. The horde of ghastly shapes began to push toward the boys, forcing them into but one place: the fireplace. As soon as their feet grazed the ash and discard within it, they were swallowed whole. And as I said, never to be seen again. That house still stands in Falkland Hills. Stories still permeate the tongues of curious minds. It has been said that an order had once been put forth to finally rid the town of the house. But when the contractor went to inspect the property, she was never seen nor heard from again. Some say it was because she was fleeing a bad marriage. Others say she simply never showed. And some know the truth. In Falkland Hills, just beyond Maple Street, there lay an old house. And that house
is hungry.